So a little bit more about me. I'm Saskia. I'm based in Berlin, Germany, and I'm a senior support engineer for Sanity. And as I said before, one of my uh, areas of expertise or something that I'm really enjoyed digging into is customizations and especially custom components. Um, so what are custom components, right? Custom components can be anything that extend or replaces any parts of your studio, and that can either be added via the components API, or you can even add some of your own logic to it, right? So why would you even use customizations? And we can see a lot of different ways that custom components and customizations can really do a lot of amazing stuff. And so some things that I really like to highlight: any kind of customization, especially through the components API, can just make your editors' lives a lot easier, right? So we saw use cases where you don't want them to lose context, want to enable them to have a better workflow, or adjust the workflows to each specific use case. We can add additional functionality as well. Then we can also amend the inner workings of the studio, and we can, of course, make our own lives a lot easier long term. So what kind of components, custom components are there? And the good news are there's basically all of them. So you can customize basically almost everything in the studio, which makes it very powerful. And using custom components can really enhance the experience of your studio, but also just your content velocity and anything else you want to do long term. And because there's the more options we have, the harder it might be to just find your way in, or do your customizations, plan them, and execute them. So I wanted to show to show you some of my workflows or the processes that I go through. And the first one that is forgotten a lot of times is asking your users what they need, right? So there's a couple of questions that I usually like to ask my editors or anybody wanting help when they build new custom components is, do you have contact to your editors? And if yes, what kind of questions do you want, right? So one that I usually always ask is just like, what would your optimal workflow look like? And that is regardless of what the studio already gives you, right? It's not about just understanding how they would best use Sanity, but how they would best do certain workflows, right? And they can all like intertwine and have different contexts and go through those. But generally, it's always good to know what is the optimal workflow. Then what I also like to do is just like, do you have any other tool, any other app, any other thing that gives you something that you really like, that you enjoy doing, that helps you do your work? And then also like look into why that might be the case, right? Another question that I also always ask is like, do you do it often? Like whatever you want to build, do you need it often, or could you maybe let that be a little bit more on the back burners, right? But on the other hand, if the person doesn't use it often, you can then also understand like, oh, this person might need help understanding what the actual workflow is, or what this part of the document, or just the overall content does. They might not know that because they don't use it often. So you might have to add customizations to make sure that they can use it less often, but still understand what they're doing. Then you can always ask like, what would you like to have automated, and what would you like to do more of, or what would you like to take off your plate, and what would you then concentrate on, right? So that's something that you can always use very well to then use AI, or do other things that just like run in the background while editors can do what they best do and what they would like to concentrate on or should concentrate on. And then one of the things that I really learned through the projects that I did outside of Sanity with Sanity is understanding what people don't understand, right? Because there's so many different people using your studio potentially who never had any formal education in anything digital, right? Or they might have little understanding of what formatting versus styling does, and all of those things. So understanding their skill level might also help you build better components. that are tailored to their individual needs. And so when I gotten to talk to the editors or maybe the other developers who have contact with the editors, I usually try to sketch it out, right? I'm a huge visual thinker, so without having a visual representation, especially when I'm starting out in something, it's really something that I need and will generally help understand where pitfalls are, where blind spots are as well, or where opportunities are for better automations, or where you could optimize your content structure versus your content flow, stuff like that. So usually I go to FigJam and just pile in some of the things that I think would work together, have different versions of it somewhere, and then really think about like, where do things interact, where do I want to pull in which data, what is referencing what, and things like that really help me find ways to better understand what the overall workflow needs to be, what maybe the process is, but then also like finding new places on where to add maybe something. And yeah, I have a lot of those in different versions in Figma, and just try to always reference back and make sure to also make it available for people who are interested in it, right? So people that work in the studio might then understand like how things really interact. And having it displayed in this way is sometimes easier to understand than just having a digital representation of whatever is content, right? So JSON is not always a very helpful format to display information. Don't lose focus, because I do that as well. So back to step 3. You can really be creative with what you want, right? So there's a lot of things that you can do while not trying to recreate everything, right? You don't have to spend time, especially not a lot of time, rebuilding stuff that is already there. And there's different parts that can be used to different extents, right? And one would be, for example, using styled components to add simple little changes to be it icons or buttons and other things, because you can wrap anything that you have in the studio in a wrapper and then go and use a CSS selector to just get stuff in there. And the Sanity Studio is built to allow those. And you can also like use the themes and other parts of the studio that will allow you to have light mode and dark mode automatically applied, stuff like that. It really works amazing for smaller editions, right? So smaller things that you would like to have. And then one of those things that many people forget when they build form components especially, but also studio components overall, is using render default, because render default can give you exactly what is usually rendered out in the studio, but then also gives you the ability to extend props and pass it back down to render default. So in this example, for example, in this example, I have an array of sections. In each section some sections can appear only once, right? So header sections in a page there can only be one header. And although I supply the option to both add a text header, it can only be an image, so a hero header, right? So these two things can appear, but I want to reduce the ability of any editor to add more than one. So yeah, what you can use is styled components for a lot of things, and wrap your components, even the ones that you get from the Sanity UI, and add styling to it and pass down certain styling to other parts of the components that you're using. So then when you use render default, this is what I wanted to show you before. So as you see, we have the props that we can manipulate to a certain degree and then pass down back to render default. So we can do things like filter out any options from arrays to not use these things anymore, or not allow them as new items through the add new item button. And that's, as you can see, pretty easy because in this component, the only thing I do is check props.value if there already is one of the two header sections, and then use that check to filter out both sections from the possible array items. And then one thing that I always really like to do is also go through our existing code base. So because we are, especially the studio is open source, you can go through and find whatever you want to do, right? And this example here basically is something that I built for a inspector, so a table of contents one, and I really wanted to have the option to click on something and then it automatically opens up the right part in my form, the right input, or even the block inside of portable text. And I thought about it long and hard, and I tried to recreate it, but then it just didn't work the same way. And then I thought about it, like, validations do exactly that. They have a message, and if you click on it, you get to the point where the validation error is caused by, right? And so I found this wonderful hook, use document pane, tested it a little bit, and was able to build really cool things with it. Although I have to say, right, from a support perspective for Sanity, not everything is marked as or exported as a public API. So if you use internal or hidden functions, hooks, or whatever, you have to be aware that it is on you to maintain things. And if something changes, you would have to be on top of that. But I would rather be debugging when something changes than having to redo everything that's already there, right? And you can see it's just like what I did in 4 or 5 files before is just like a couple of lines of code now. Then step 4 is one of the things that I learned really to appreciate is adding guardrails wherever I can and helpers for users. This could be inline documentation and other stuff. But one of the parts that I usually did not really dig into too far until I did some more some more complex projects was validations as such. And as you can see, my validations usually are pretty extensive, especially on portable text. So I can validate that my the right heading is on the very top. Then I validate the order of headings, so I make sure that they go down one step and then can go up whatever they want to ensure that the DOM is really taken into account or always like adhered to, so it's accessible and other things. But I don't need to make people aware of this, right? It's just like it's going to be indicated for them. It's either they are not able to publish, or maybe I'm just adding helpers as well. So the warning below is just like maybe they want to use a heading, but they kind of shy away from the styling of the heading, right? So it's one of the things that I then explain if it occurs. And validation is really, there's no such thing as too much validation. And you can really do a lot of amazing stuff with validations alone. And because this is my dog, Alfie, another thing that I really like to add is indicators or descriptions and other previews within the form for anything that is kind of hidden away, because I want to make sure that people don't have to search for things, right? So for example, in here we can see an object that is collapsed, so it's shut. And in this example, this is for open graph tags, so anything that is on site metadata. And I don't need it to be open all the time, especially not if it has content, right? But it should be still possible for editors to see it if they needed to. And so I created this little custom field component that checks if the field is toggled, closed or not, collapsed or not. And then if it's collapsed, I just display everything that's in here, right? So it's just a little helper for people to be able to see what is there, even though it might be hidden from view to a certain degree. And then one of those things that I really enjoy doing is building things that people will really love. And things like in this example is actually smack full of examples that I really enjoy building, but are really useful to me, but also my colleagues. For example, this is the table of contents inspector that can be opened from the document header, and just shows you anything that is within the portable text editor, and so shows nesting and everything. And if you click on the examples, it will open up the correct block, right? Even nested things can be shown and opened, although they're nested where they are. Then it also works in a reader view, which is a React component that acts as a preview because we don't deploy many of these things. So I want to be able to still have a preview, like a reader view, which I add as a view through the structure builder API. And the table of contents inspector can register which view is open and then adds different links and actually scrolls into view what you click on, right? If you then switch back to the editor, it will lead you to the right blocks for editing purposes. And another thing that is here, with what you can see, the little question mark with a circle, that's actually inline documentation that is maintained through its own document type and in its own structure by admins, and which can be opened on a field level, but also on a document level, and just explain what this overall does, maybe instructions, maybe do's and don'ts, and all of those things are in line with wherever the person works in, right? So documentation doesn't have to be its own thing. And I mean, context switching is a pain. So having it all in this kind of custom components, right? Because an inspector is the custom component, then the view is a custom component, and all of these things give people a really good editor experience. So step 5, which is the last one, is documentation, and also make your work readable. Because I myself am a huge proponent. I came late to the whole developing stage, but sometimes it's really hard to read legacy code or undocumented code, right? And we all know the pains when we can't find something, but I really make sure to have naming being accessible, right? So everything that you need to have should be in the name itself. But then also document inline via comments, and then because I now use quite extensive TypeScript quite extensively. I really like the TS docs and adding things for myself because I'm super bad at remembering stuff. So what I usually do is add these TS docs that I can then just like remind myself what is actually happening when I use those. And when I import those, I can really make sure that I'm importing the right one without having to do a lot of research while I'm doing stuff, while I'm working, while I'm hyper focused on something else. And what it also does, whenever I have something that is really well documented and has a lot of like, this is what this does, this is what this does, is that I do less debugging, because most of the time the person who might be using my code can debug it quite easily themselves, because it's like they know where things are. And in the process of identifying what might be the root cause of the bug, they actually might even find the solution for it already, right? So they will send me the fix more than just a report, which is quite takes a lot of time off my hands. And now I have a couple of examples of some of the things that I've built over the time, just to maybe as an amuse-bouche for your own work later on. So I love descriptions. As I said before, any kind of inline documentation, helpers and things can really help you build something that gives editors the ability to quickly do things without having to guess whatever the intention of a field is, or where it's going to be used, or what something can mean, right? So there's a lot of things that I do with these components, and usually people forget that things like title description and subtitle in previews can actually be passed down as React elements, which is really helpful when you look at an example like this one. It can give you a lot of helpers to where you will not be bothered if somebody doesn't understand, right? Because there's a lot of information already there. And then one thing that I really love to do is keeping things asynchronous. So for example, with lists of options, a lot of times when there is a new option coming in or something has changed, and your list is hard coded, you yourself might have to go back and change things and update things. And it can take a little bit of time off your hands, as you can be spending building cool stuff, right? So what I usually do is whenever I have a list of something and it needs to be updated regularly, but I also want to make sure that things get pulled in a specific way, right? I usually use these custom input components to just fetch another document type maybe, or a list, an array of another document, and just display it like this and pass, like fetch it, make sure it's the right data format, and then pass it down to the options list of an array or a string field, right? So really easy to do, but very powerful when it comes to maintaining content per se, and especially when it's relative like that, right? Arrays, I love arrays. So as you might see now, I really like pimping up whatever I do. So this is a page builder example that I built for one of my private projects where I volunteer. And what I really like to do is like give editors different options to how I display things so they can best do what they do, right? So for example, if they want to edit something that is already existing, they have to go through presentations. Way easier to do it like this, right? But if they build a page, that they work from build one up, right? It's way easier to have it in different complexities than seeing what you might have had before, right? So as you can see here, just like I use previews quite extensively to show people what is in there, and also supply hovering tooltips for each of the array items that are deeply nested again in these sections. And there's really a lot of cool stuff that you can do. And the same also goes for block arrays. So another type of array that I really like, where you can add a lot of things to it. And as you see here, there's my validations that I showed you before in action. So you can see there's warnings and errors, but at the same time, there's two other different things in here. One is, for example, the buttons element. That is a custom block that is an object with an array in it, and each array item is a button, right? So if I only would have added the custom block, you would see the first this. Where's my mouse? Oh, that also doesn't work. I should have restarted my laptop maybe. So the buttons item preview, that's the normal one, right? You have a media component, you have a title, a subtitle, and then you have the context menu. And I wanted them to be able to see what they had set as buttons. So I added a preview for each button that actually looks like the buttons that are going to be rendered out in the front end. And if you hover over them, they will show you the content of the button item, but also if you click on it, it will open up the button item in question using the use pane hook, use document pane hook, which is really amazing for these kind of things. And further down, we see the Paladin client. That is actually a block type, which is just a reference to a testimonial, but I wanted editors to have everything in view when they work on news bulletins or longer pieces of text. I don't want them to remember which kind of reference was added there and have the content of it displayed as well, right? In full, so they have a better understanding what this would look like overall. Although, of course, these things can change and it will not look exactly like this, definitely not, but still they have the content ready for them to consume as well as work in, right? And it's really all about the props, because if you go on a props hunt and also, like, of course, in the documentation and the type documentation and documentation reference, that's all good, but going through the TS docs, which I can only hugely recommend, is something that really can supercharge whatever you do, because you will know what things you can hook into or maybe use or reuse, and what is there even, right? Because there's no way we can one-to-one document everything that is always coming in and changing, and there's a lot of code that's internal, but it could still be useful to understand or even fork or use with discretion, of course. But yeah, the props and the types, they are the backbone of all of everything custom. And of course, you don't need to do everything in TypeScript, but you can still look up what you have, right? What you can find, what we have supplied, and build a lot of really cool things. Yeah, so thank you so much, although you did not see everything. And yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn in the Sanity community, but you can also go to my GitHub and find the page builder example repository, which is public, and have a snoop there because I added everything, even the things that you did not see, to that, so you can have a look, and guides are following as well when I find the time. But yeah.